So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to everybody that's watching online. I really appreciate it. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about challenging convention and the future of work. So some information about me. I wrote a book a couple years ago called The Collaborative Organization, which is a strategy guide on how to make collaboration work within the enterprise. I run a company called Chess Media Group, and we work with a lot of large organizations around the world, trying to help them understand what the future of work is going to look like. I also contribute to Forbes, Huffington Post, and I have a new book coming out in September of this year called The Future of Work. And Bill McDermott was actually kind enough to be one of the people that endorsed the book. I consider myself to be pretty fortunate to do what I do. My family grew up in the Republic of Georgia. They migrated to Italy, which is where they met. They then moved to Australia, which is where I was born, although I don't have the cool accent. And then we moved to the United States. And growing up, my family kept telling me, challenge convention, think differently, don't just accept what people are telling you. And that sort of fueled my curiosity and interest in all things related to the future of work. So here's the agenda. I'm going to do a 1-3-3. One big idea, 3 areas to apply it to, and then 3 things that you guys can do when you get back to the office. So before I get started, I'm really curious to hear, when you guys think of the future of work, what do you think of? Just yell out anything that comes to mind. Remote. Technology. Structure? Less structure. Okay. What about somebody over here? Open. Anyone else? What was that? Palm trees. I like it. I like it. Great. So in order to understand the future of work, we first have to understand a little bit about who this guy is. Does anybody know who this guy is? What about now? Something related to chess. Right? So this is Magnus Carlsen. He's currently the world chess champion. He's 23 years old, and he's the world's highest rated chess player ever. In fact, many consider Magnus to be the greatest chess player that's ever lived. Now, what's really fascinating about Magnus is that he became a great chess player because of his ability to challenge convention. Right? When most people think of chess players, they think of kind of corporate guys that are sitting across the table from each other. It's boring. It's very mundane. Magnus changed all that around. Right? He made chess exciting. He has an app, right, which is unheard of for the chess world. He does modeling work, and he has a very unconventional style of play. Sometimes he'll make a move and then he'll take it back the next move afterwards. So he has this very, very unique playing style, which is all around challenging convention. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is challenging convention in the workplace. So we spend a lot of time within our organizations thinking about all sorts of things, right? We think about technology, we think about sales, we think about our supply chains, we think about marketing, we think about customer insights. But how often do our organizations, and do we actually sit and think about how we work and how we get work done within our companies? So the 3 things that I'm going to talk about, and the 3 areas that I want to encourage you to apply this notion of challenging convention to, are how we work, how we lead, and how organizations are structured, and how we build our companies. So if we were to visualize what that looks like, it would look something like this. In the future, in the center, we have this concept and this notion of the future of work. And around it, we have these 3 core ideas: how we work, how we lead, and how we build companies. And the one thing that binds all those together is this notion of challenging convention. So some of you guys might be thinking, why? Right? Why do we want to challenge convention to begin with? If things are going fine within our companies, why bother doing anything differently? And so there are 3 unique opportunities for why we need to challenge convention around how we lead, how we structure our companies, and how we work. And the 3 key pieces of value that we get out of that is we're able to attract top talent, build and cultivate and foster the best leaders within our organization, and create competitive organizations. Right? So those are the 3 key things that we get when we challenge convention in the workplace. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means. So this is the actual dictionary synonym for the word manager. The words in blue are actual synonyms from the dictionary for the word manager. Right? Slave driver, boss, zookeeper, right? These are synonyms for manager. basically, managers look a lot like this guy, right? Everybody here has seen Office Space, I'm hoping, right? Okay, good. If you haven't, raise your hand so we can all poke fun at you. So this is sort of the stereotype of what a manager is, right? And it fits very well with those types of synonyms that I just mentioned of being a slave driver or a boss or a zookeeper. Now, what about for employee, right? Again, actual dictionary definition, actual synonyms from the dictionary for the word employee. Cog, servant, slave, and there are, of course, many others that go along with that. So basically, an employee looks a lot like this guy, right? Pretty much most of us are living this Office Space type of world. Dictionary definition for work. And again, the synonyms from the dictionary for the word work. Daily grind, drudgery, struggle. Now, if we put these three things together, work really sucks, right? For the past 100, 150 years, this is how we've been building our organizations. On the notion that managers are slave drivers, that employees are cogs, and that work is drudgery and the daily grind, right? You have employees that do something. If they fall off the wagon, you replace them. They're expendable. They're cogs. They're literally like cogs, right? So this is how we've been building our companies for the last 100 and 150 years. So why is this notion of challenging convention important today? There are 5 trends which are impacting organizations today, which are really forcing them to challenge convention in the workplace. The first one are new behaviors, right? What do I mean by new behaviors? 5, 10 years ago, if somebody were to say, hey, you know what? One day you're going to live a very public life. You're going to have all your interests and your ideas up online for the world to see, right? You would tell them that they're nuts. But look at where we are today, right? We share our ideas on blogs. We put up reviews on Yelp. We tell people where we are on Foursquare. We provide real-time feedback to organizations on Twitter. We have our entire work history and resumes on LinkedIn. We live a very, very public life, right? So we have all these new types of behaviors. We expect to be able to find information easily. We expect to be able to build communities when we want to, right? These are all sorts of new behaviors that we have. The next big trend that we're seeing impacting organizations today is technology. And there are all sorts of technologies, right? Big data, the Internet of Things, automation in the workplace, all sorts of interesting technologies that are impacting organizations. Now, to give you an idea of the impact that technology is having on the workplace, we have to turn to chess, right? Around 1,000 years ago, a mathematician by the name of Sissa created the game of chess. Now, after he created the game, he went to the ruler of the land at the time and said, look, I created chess. And the ruler was very pleased and said, wow, this is great. Pick anything that you want and I'll give it to you. And Sissa thought about it for a while and he said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to lay out a chessboard, which is 64 squares. On the first square, I want you to put 1 grain of rice. On the second square, I want you to put 2 grains of rice. On the third square, 4. And keep doubling it until you get to the end. And the ruler thought about it for a while, and he's like, what, are you kidding? You can have anything that you want. You can have a palace. You can have camels, horses. And you're asking for rice? And the ruler says, yeah. Or, I'm sorry, Sissa says, yeah, that's all I want. I just want rice. So the ruler says to his servants, all right, figure out how much rice this is and give it to the guy. Let's get rid of him. So the servants go away for a while and they come back and the ruler's jaw drops, right? It turns out that this is more rice than we produce globally today, right? This amount of rice would be the equivalent to a rice Mount Everest, right? That much rice does not exist in the world. So the story goes that Sissa then became the ruler of the land. So what's the point of telling you this story, right? What's the point of telling you this story about rice and chess? Well, it turns out that when you get to the second half of the chessboard, data starts to increase exponentially. And Ray Kurzweil from Google says that this is where we are now. We're at the second half of the chessboard, which is where data and information and everything that we create and produce is increasing at an exponential scale, right? For the first time, exponential growth that we're seeing around data. This hasn't happened before. The third trend that we're seeing is the millennial workforce. And Bill talked about this briefly in his keynote. So the millennial workforce, These weird alien-looking creatures that are coming down, that are disrupting all of our companies, right? So what's so interesting about millennials in the workplace? This is from the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what's fascinating about this is that by 2020, millennials are expected to comprise the majority of the workforce. By 2020, right? This is 5-6 years away. By 2025, millennials are expected to be 75% of the workforce. 75% of the workforce in around a decade. Now, what's interesting about millennials isn't just the fact that it's a group of people that have new ideas and values and expectations about work. It's the fact that the majority of the people in the workplace are going to be these types of people, right? So this is forcing organizations to rethink how they've been building their companies, right? How they incentivize employees, what type of perks they're giving out, how they're structuring their companies, who they decide to promote as managers and leaders. There was an interesting statistic that I found in the book that's coming out in September, and it was something like 63 or 68% of managers are eligible to retire today. Right? 63 or 68%, that's a huge number. Guess who's taking the majority of those managerial roles? Millennials, right? More so than any other demographic group, millennials are taking those managerial roles. You'll also notice that come 2020, we're going to start to see this new type of generation creeping in, right? Gen 2020. You guys think millennials are weird. Gen 2020 is going to freak you out, right? These are the guys that are going to be like teleporting to work. You're going to have robots that are, doing work for them in the workplace. It's going to be weird, right? Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that yet. So this is my little brother, Josh. I use him in pretty much every keynote, every presentation I've ever done. Many, many thousands of people have seen him around the world, and he still doesn't know that he's in my presentations. One day, he will find out. So what's really interesting about Josh, he's turning 22 this year. Now, Josh never went to school for film. He never went to school for photography. He didn't do any of the traditional means of learning how to do this. In fact, when I went to school, there were people that were spending $80,000 to $100,000 to get a degree in film and photography. So who wants to guess, how did Josh, a 22-year-old kid, learn how to do photography, learn how to do editing, learn how to do all these different types of things that you would need a degree in film to learn how to do? YouTube, right? Discussion forums, communities, right? He didn't have to go get a degree. He didn't have to go to school to learn how to do this. He taught himself. And then after he taught himself, he was able to, slowly build up his business and get these very, very expensive cameras, right? So this is the future workforce. So you have to think, right? Is your organization ready for the Joshes of the world, right? I guarantee you that Josh has no idea what it's like to get 200 emails a day. He's never seen a cubicle. You show him a cubicle, he'll freak out, right? He just doesn't know what it's like. He's never seen that, right? You show him a legacy CRM system or a legacy file sharing or storage system. He's not going to know what to do with it, right? He just doesn't know what that's like. He's never seen it before. And this is the majority of the workforce in the next few years. So you can understand why organizations today are starting to think about how they can challenge convention in the workplace, right? So is your organization ready for these types of Joshes? The next trend that we're seeing is mobility. I love to travel. A couple years ago, I spent a month in China with a buddy of mine from college, and we traveled all over the place. We went to Tibet, we went to Beijing, Xi'an, Chengdu, all the provinces you could think of. And we went to some really remote places. And one of the places that we went to was Yunnan. And in Yunnan, there's a remote rice paddy field. So we went to this remote rice paddy field. We rented bikes. We're cruising around the rice paddy field. And we see that there's this guy out in the field. Just one guy. What was fascinating about this one guy is that he had a smartphone. This guy in the rice paddy field is able to access the same information, the same content, and the same people that I can living in the Bay Area, right? That's what mobility means to organizations around the world. It doesn't matter where you are, right? The theme for the future of work is connect to work. In other words, if you can connect to the internet, you can get your job done regardless of where you are. whether you're in the Bay Area or whether you're in a remote rice paddy field somewhere in China, right? It doesn't matter. The fifth trend that we're seeing is globalization. Probably the simplest way to look at or think about globalization is this idea of doing business without boundaries, right? No boundaries whatsoever. And no boundaries means that just because you're in one physical location doesn't mean you can't do business and transact and work with people and others. My company, Chess Media Group, is very small, right? Much smaller than I'm sure many of your companies are. Yet we have the ability to market globally, to bring on talent from anywhere in the world, to do business anywhere in the world, in any currency, in any type of cultural setting, right? In any type of geography, right? That's what globalization is doing to our organizations. We can work without boundaries regardless of where we are located. It doesn't matter. So those 5 trends are causing a very, very interesting shift that we're seeing in the workplace. And this is sort of a fundamental theme that's going to be talked about in the book that's coming out later this year. Traditionally, within our organizations, there's been this consistent flow of who dictated how work would get done, right? It would start with organizations at the very top. And when I say organizations, I mean stakeholders, key-level executives, all the people that sit at the top of our organizations. And these people would get together, and they would decide how the organization should be run. What policies should be followed, how should people be working, how should everything get done. They would then make their decisions and then pass that off to managers and say, we, supreme rulers, are giving you managers directions on how you should run your teams and structure, the things that you're doing. Managers would then take that and pass it down to employees, right? And say, here, employees, our supreme rulers have told us that this is how we should be working and these are the things that we should be doing. This is how you have to do it. And now we're seeing a complete reversal of who's guiding and dictating how work should get done. Instead, what we're seeing is that employees are helping shape how work should get done, right? Employees are helping guide how organizations should be structured and how employees want to work and what type of work they want to do and who they want to work for and the types of projects that they want to work on, right? Employees are passing that information to managers. Managers are passing that information up to organizations. And we're starting to see dramatic shifts in how companies are being structured and how they're being run, right? In the types of leaders that we're growing and building within our companies. So we're seeing this complete 180 that we haven't seen before. And this is something that started probably within the last few years, and it's going to accelerate dramatically within the next few years, right? By 2020, 2025, this is going to be a huge, huge factor for how work gets done. So again, the 3 areas that we want to challenge convention around: how we work, how we lead, and how we structure our companies. So let's start with how we work. For those of you that can't read the graphic, it says our biggest challenge is the time zone difference. In New York, it's 2:45, but in our headquarters, it's 1974. I know this is a cartoon, but everybody can relate to this. In fact, it's rare that anybody sees this cartoon and says, I don't get it, right? Most people can relate to this within their companies, right? Why is that? Why is it that we all relate to this within our organizations, right? We all know that it's true. Another fascinating statistic that we keep hearing about is this lack of engagement in the workplace, right? The fact that only 13% of employees within our workplace are actually engaged and show up with, meaning and purpose to do the jobs that they want to do. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a big fan of the show The Walking Dead. And this freaks me out. Because what this means is that we are living in a real-life zombie apocalypse scenario, right? We have 80+% of employees that are showing up for a paycheck that could care less about what they're doing, who they're working with, why they're working, what your company stands for, or who your customers are, right? This is a huge, huge number. We should be freaking out. It's a very, very scary statistic. So I have a theory for why I think a lot of this is happening, right? Why are so many employees disengaged at work? And I think it ultimately comes down to this, right? How our organizations are changing is not keeping up with the pace of how the world of work is changing, right? The world of work is changing at a much more rapid pace than our organizations can handle. And what happens is, as that gap grows, so does the employee engagement divide, right? As employees, we have certain expectations when we come into work. And more, as those expectations aren't met, and as we start to feel that we're working in an outdated company, we become more and more disengaged, right? Why is it, for example, that employees need to get managerial approval to buy pens or a new chair, right? Why do we have all these different types of things within our organizations? We have all sorts of outdated policies and approaches and things that we want to get done. But it's really interesting, depending on how far back you want to go around management. Most people think that modern management started within the last 150 years or so. The fundamental role of management, the whole reason for why management was created, was to make sure that somebody was there so that when employees show up, that one person can make sure that they do their jobs and don't get in trouble, right? The goal of the manager was to make sure that employees show up to work every day to do the same job over and over and over and over again. That was the goal of a manager. That's it. There was no focus on engagement, on ideation, and on innovation. None of that stuff, right? They didn't care, right? The goal of a manager was just to make sure that the employees stay out of trouble and do their jobs. That's it. And this notion of management and this concept of doing the same thing over and over and just making sure that employees stay out of trouble has carried into our organizations, right? It's carried into many of our organizations today. And unfortunately, that's how many people still manage. Not all, right? I mean, there are a lot of great companies that are starting to do things differently. But for the majority of companies, that's how they manage, right? That's how they structure and that's how they build their companies. And today we're starting to rethink a lot about what that means. So I found this to be very, very interesting. And I think it's very, very telling for where many of our organizations are today, right? And this is our current work week, right? We have the Monday morning blues, terrible Tuesdays, hump day Wednesday, thirsty Thursday, where we drink heavily and try to cope with the week that has just passed. And then on Fridays, we are so happy, for thank goodness it's Friday. We are overjoyed that the weekend is coming, right? This is how many employees feel within their organizations. This is why we have such a high employee disengagement rate. Who wants to guess what day of the week statistically is the highest for heart attack rates? Anyone? Monday. Why Monday? Why do you think Monday is the highest day for heart attack rates? Turns out that a study was done not too long ago. I think it was in 2006. And Monday is indeed the day when heart attacks are most prevalent. And that is because employees feel such a sense of fear and stress of going back to work that they have heart attacks, right? It's very, very unfortunate. It's a very, very scary thing within our companies today. The other big shift that we're seeing is from hands to brains, right? The majority of employees, the way that we used to work many years ago was all with our hands, right? Supply chain, stuff like that. We're now seeing a huge shift to using our brains, to the knowledge worker, to the learning worker, right? A big shift that we haven't seen happen in the past. So these are some of the things that the smart and progressive organizations around the world are starting to do. Leveraging flexible work environments, encouraging employee innovation, shaping career paths, using collaborative technologies, autonomy, and sharing. And I'll give you a couple examples of what some of these companies are doing. Let's start with leveraging flexible work environments. Curious, how many of your organizations here have flexible work environments? Okay, awesome. So you're already starting to see this happen within your organizations. What about encouraging employee innovation? How many of your organizations encourage employee innovation? Okay, great. So my favorite example of that is Whirlpool. And most people don't typically think of Whirlpool as this type of a unique and engaged and innovative organization, but they are. And they're one of the few organizations around the world that make innovation everyone's job, right? They have a process, they teach, they educate, they train employees on how to innovate within the workplace. How many of your organizations are using collaborative technologies? Okay, that's great. So a lot of organizations are also starting to use platforms like SAP Jam to connect and engage employees around the world and bring in customers and suppliers into having relevant conversations. Flexible work environments has been probably a key cornerstone for a lot of organizations. And the reason for that is that a lot of employees entering the workplace are now saying that they would be willing to take up to a 9 or 10% pay cut to be able to leverage a flexible work environment. HR professionals around the world are saying leveraging flexible work environments is one of the key ways that they're able to attract top talent, right? So we have to rethink how we work, right? Work is no longer just about employees driving an hour each way to get to work, showing up in an office from 9 to 5, checking email 20, 30 times a day, going to meetings, right? When we think about most of our days, of how an employee's day is typically structured, we wake up at 6:30, 7 o'clock, get the kids ready for school, drop them off at school, go to work, check email, go to a meeting, check email again, go to lunch, check email, another meeting, right? That's how our days are typically structured. Who wants to guess what's the number one thing that we do when we wake up in the morning? Check email. What's the number one thing we do before we go to bed at night? Check email, right? Just because we're always connected doesn't mean we're always available. So we really need to challenge this idea of how we're working within our organizations and really start to think about what we can do differently, right? How can we challenge convention within the workplace? The second area that we need to challenge convention around is how we lead and the types of leaders that we have within our organizations. So these are some of the things that progressive organizations are doing. One example that I'd like to touch on is from the CEO of ING Direct Canada. And his name is Peter Aceto, A-C-E-T-O. And not too long ago, and by the way, they're using a collaborative platform within their company. And not too long ago, he went publicly in front of his whole company, and he said, and this is what he called it, I'm giving my employees the right to bitch, right? It's exactly what he called it. And basically what he said is that I want all the employees that work here to tell me what you don't like about working here. Tell me what you're frustrated with. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what upsets you. Just give me everything. And at first, employees were a little skeptical. They're like, is this like the quickest way to get fired? The first people that respond are the ones that get canned. But slowly and surely, people started to respond, right? Managers jumped on board. Employees jumped on board. And he had hundreds and hundreds of comments from employees that were telling him everything that they didn't like and everything they were frustrated with. And employees were coming up with all sorts of things, right? Everything from strategic initiatives to the fact that they didn't have hash browns on the breakfast menu cafeteria. And when I spoke with Peter, I said, look, a lot of these ideas aren't groundbreaking, right? I mean, just because you bring back hash browns to your breakfast menu cafeteria isn't really going to change much at your company, right? It's not going to make you more profitable. It's not going to save you any money. Why bother? And he said that the main reason why he's doing that is to build trust within his organization, right? If employees feel that they can come to him with their problems, it creates a culture of trust and collaboration within the company, right? It's a very counterintuitive way to lead, right? It's a great example of challenging convention. Because most managers within organizations would never do that, right? This notion of embracing vulnerability is something that we're starting to see within the workplace. We're also seeing this notion of serving employees, right? Again, the traditional idea of a manager was to make sure that employees showed up to work every day, got their jobs done, and went home and didn't cause any problems, right? Today, the progressive and forward-thinking organizations see managers as employees that are serving other employees, right? The role of the manager is to remove obstacles from the path of others. Practicing distributed decision-making is a big one that we're starting to see within a lot of organizations, right? When we think of how decisions get done within most organizations, it's typically managers that sit together, make decisions, and then pass that off to the rest of the organization. A good example here is TELUS. They're a telecommunications company based in Canada. I think they have around 30,000 plus employees. The way that all decisions get done at this organization is collaboratively and collectively, right? Managers sit down with employees to make decisions. Managers don't just make decisions and tell everybody else what to do. And at TELUS, their engagement levels have skyrocketed, right? I think they were in the 20 or 30 percentile a couple years ago, and now they're up to the 70 or 80th percentile for where they've become as far as an engaged company. So we're starting to see a lot of really, really interesting things. Another key area that we're seeing is around this idea of earning leadership within the company, right? Typically, most people associate being a manager with being a leader, right? You got promoted to that role, so you are a leader. That's not always the case. I think the best example of this is looking at financial institutions. Years ago, I worked at Morgan Stanley. I interned there for a few months when I was much younger. And the way that financial institutions typically work is they promote people based on how much money they bring into the company. Right? If you bring a lot of money, you're promoted, you're an SVP, you now manage others. That doesn't make you a good leader. Right? So a lot of organizations today, what we're seeing is that they're encouraging managers to earn leadership. Right? You have to build followers. You have to earn that ability to lead other people. The third area around challenging convention is how we structure our organizations. And here are a couple things to start to think about. Right? Operating like a small company, creating a distributed workforce, flatter hierarchies, etc. I've never spoken with a single organization that ever says to me, you know what we need at our company? We need more layers. I want more hierarchy. We have 11 layers. I want 30. Nobody ever says that. Right? Every company around the world is always trying to flatten. Right? They always want to make communication and collaboration easier to get done. Creating a distributed workforce is crucial. Right? And one of the interesting things that we're seeing around this is tapping into the freelancer economy. Right? A lot of organizations are starting to tap into freelancers around the world, right? Regardless of where they are, to create this type of a distributed, on-demand workforce. A big one that I think is very interesting is this notion of focusing on want instead of need. A lot of organizations always assume that employees needed to work there. Right? In fact, the number one asset that a lot of organizations have to recruit top talent is cash. But what good is cash in an environment where employees are starting to value other things above money? Flexible work environments, doing meaningful work, right? What good is cash in that type of environment? It's not. So what's happening is that a lot of organizations are starting to shift their focus, right, to creating organizations where employees want to work there, not because they need to work there. I think this is a very, very fascinating thing that we're going to see much more of going forward. And this, of course, ties into corporate social responsibility, sustainability, those types of things as well. So we're starting to see very, very interesting things around how organizations are structured. Another area that we're seeing this is around how teams are built, right? From large teams to smaller teams. Jeff Bezos from Amazon has this famous 2 pizza rule, right? If your team can't be fed by 2 pizzas, it's too big. I've been on conference calls where there are 40, 50 people from an organization from one team. So a lot of organizations, a lot of forward-thinking companies are starting to create smaller, nimble, more distributed, and agile teams. As far as the diverse workforce goes, one of the other interesting things that we're seeing is more women in senior management roles. Right? This is a huge trend that we're seeing that I explore more in the book as well. Right? The progressive, forward-thinking organizations are starting to bring more women and more diversity into the organization. So we're really starting to rethink how organizations are structured. Does it make sense to have this giant, big monolith? Sometimes when I do workshops or I speak with clients, I always ask them, if you were to rebuild your company today, would you have it the same way that it is now? Nobody ever says yes. Right? Nobody ever says yes. People can always come up with new things that they want to do, with new progressive ways that their organizations should be structured and built. So again, the one big idea is challenging convention. The 3 areas to apply it to: how we work, how we lead, and how we build our organizations. Now I want to touch on 3 things that you can do when you get back to the workplace. And I have a much more laid out framework in the book that's coming out later in September. But the first thing that we're seeing a lot of progressive organizations do is assemble a team. Some organizations call this a future of work team. Xerox has this, Whirlpool has this, Schneider Electric has this, right? They call them different things, but the one thing that's consistent is that organizations around the world have teams dedicated to figuring out what the future of work at their organization is going to look like, right? These are the go-to people. They monitor trends, they look at how employees are working, they come up with strategies, they come up with ideas, and they help the organization move forward. So the first thing that you can do when you get back to your organization is put together some type of a team, right? Get a distributed group of people to start thinking about ways that you can challenge convention in the workplace. Challenging convention is a very simple thing, right? Just start with asking why, right? Why do we have employee annual reviews, right? Every 6 months or every year. Adobe is a great example of an organization that recently abandoned that. And instead of doing annual reviews, they do regular employee check-ins. Far more effective and engaging at their organization. So what do you do after you assemble a team? You start doing experiments, right? In an environment where we're seeing rapid change and rapid growth and rapid movement, the best way to figure out what works and what doesn't is by doing experiments. The more experiments that you can do and the faster you can do them, the greater chance of success that you're going to have, right? Start to play around with things. If you don't have flexible work in a certain team, try offering it and see what happens. Try getting rid of annual employee reviews in a certain area. Try changing something to figure out how you can make things move forward by challenging convention. And the third thing that you want to do after you experiment is implement this type of broad-based change, right? This is the key step that a lot of organizations then go through. After you figure out what's working and what isn't, you can figure out what you want to apply and what you want to implement for the rest of the organization. So 3 things. Assemble a team, start to experiment by challenging convention, and then start to implement. So one big idea, challenge convention, 3 areas to apply it to. How we work, how we lead, and how we structure and build our companies. And the 3 takeaways that I hope you bring back to your company: start to assemble a team to start to think about these different types of things, start to experiment, and start to do some implementation. Having said that, I'll also introduce you to something that we're launching called the FOW community. FOW community is something that we're launching, and actually I think the folks at Sapphire are probably the first to hear about it. Something we're launching in the next week or so for organizations from around the world to be able to connect with each other, share advice, share best practices, get access to resources. If that's something that you're interested in, just visit fowcommunity.com. So having said that, I'll take a couple questions, and then I'm also going to be available at the table over there afterwards. Any questions on anything I talked about related to the future of work? Yes? Yes? Sure. So I'll repeat the question. The question is around, one of the slides I had something around shaping employee career paths. What does that look like? So a good example of that is Deloitte. Deloitte has something called massive employee engagement. It's something that allows you to shape your career. Oh, massive career path customization. That's what it's called. So massive career path customization is something that they allow employees to do twice a year, I believe. And what it is it allows employees to shape how they want to work. So twice a year, they have the opportunity to shape their kind of personal preferences for how they want to work. How many hours they want to work, what type of environment do they want to work in, where do they want to work. They have the opportunity to tell Deloitte how they want to work. So that's what I mean by massive, or by shaping career paths. Although they do it every 6 months, in the future going forward, we're going to see this happen much more frequently, right? Where employees are going to be able to shape their career paths at a rapid pace. Any other questions? Yes? I'll repeat the question, don't worry. Yes. So the question is around the Internet of Things and how that plays into the future of work. Yeah, that's a huge trend that we're seeing. So the Internet of Things is this notion that any device or any person that can be connected will be connected to the Internet at some point. And that plays in hugely into the future of work. I mean, imagine coming into the workplace, or first of all, imagine when you wake up, your alarm clock tells your coffee maker to start boiling coffee. Your coffee maker talks to your car that tells you the quickest route to get to the workplace. You show up at work, you have a wristband that tells you who's next to you that you need to be connected with, right? So the future of work and the Internet of Things is definitely going to be a huge thing that we're seeing. What's interesting about the Internet of Things is it's still very early to see all the impacts that we're going to have on the workplace, right? I mean, I think most people project that by 2020, 2025 is when we're going to start to see a lot of things happen within the workplace. But absolutely, I mean, that comes very much hand in hand with wearable devices, right? Where you're going to know where you're most active, where you're most productive, what hours you do your best work, who you should be working with, why you should be working with them. All those different types of things are going to play very much into the Internet of Things and wearable devices. Any other questions? Yes? Yes. So the question was around this notion of job tools, where employees don't have specific jobs, but they move around within organizations. In the book, there are a couple of examples of that. Valve is a great example of that, right? Valve is a computer company, gaming company. They make popular games like Half-Life and Counter-Strike. Valve is a very flat organization. No titles whatsoever, no managers. Employees pick everything that they want to do, right? And there are a couple organizations that do that. And the way that they do that is that they have a list of all the jobs that are available, all the projects that people are working on. You look at that list and you decide what you want to work on. If you have something that you want to do yourself, you suggest it, and it's your responsibility to recruit a team. If you can't recruit a team, that project doesn't work out. So that's absolutely a direction that a lot of organizations are going. This notion of long-term employment is completely dead. I think the average tenure for most people is around 4.3, 4.6 years. For millennials, it's 2.3, 2.6 years. So a lot of organizations going forward are going to focus on project and task-based work, right? You move around, you go from one to the other. Staying in a career for 5, 10 years, staying at the same company, not going to happen anymore. So absolutely, that's a huge trend. You had a question? I heard half of that. Something around cyclical process? Oh, performance management. So around, what was the point? Oh, Adobe, yes. So a lot of organizations, and let me know if this helps answer your question. The question was around performance management and what some of the organizations are doing. There was a study that was done a couple years ago, and basically, I think the finding was that 98% of HR managers don't see that annual employee reviews are effective. 98% of HR managers. Huge number, yet we still do them. So what a lot of organizations are doing are figuring out ways to replace annual employee reviews by other more regular, frequent check-ins. And there are all sorts of creative ways that organizations are doing this. Company in San Francisco called Medium, they developed a platform and they have something called high fives, where anytime an employee does a good job, you can give them a virtual high five. The high five is then shared with everybody else within the company. Your high fives then help influence your stock options, your salary, anything that happens within the organization. So organizations are coming up with all sorts of creative ways for how they can take this outdated concept of annual employee reviews and shift it to more frequent check-ins and frequent reviews. So hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions? Maybe take one more before we stop. Yes? Oh, sorry. Yep. Sure. So the question is around how is the future of work applying to more creative types of roles, not just for finance and marketing and those types of professions? Yeah. Oh, other way around. So how is it applying to more finance and, okay. Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge role. In the book, I cite a lot of statistics that came from Odesk and Elance. And they talk a lot about what's happening as far as freelancers go. And there's a huge, huge actual demand in areas like finance and marketing and sales for freelancers and stuff like that. And those types of task-based roles are also becoming very, very important within a lot of organizations. So it's not just for creative types of employees, it's for any employee within a company. Right? I mean, you can shift from one project to the other. You can shift from one role to the other. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, I'll be over there afterwards. So I think I'm out of time. So I'll be over there after the session's over for anybody that has any other questions. And thank you very much.